Good evening, everyone. Whoever is watching from India, and a good morning to the people who are watching from the beautiful city of Florida. Of course, the time difference is such that people are going to watch it at some other time or something like that. And for those who are watching this podcast later on, a warm welcome to you and welcome to the channel. For long on this particular platform, I have talked about mental health, I have talked about anxiety, depression, and various other forms of difficulties in life per se. While to some of the questions and issues, I have addressed them personally and in the best of my capacity. But for some, I've tried to bring on guests and experts who have talked more passionately, let's say, on the subject. And keeping the trend, today we have a very special guest. Before I bring her onto the screen, I just want to give you a little brief introduction of about who she is. Her name is Amy Morin. She's a psychotherapist. She's a mental strength trainer and the award-winning host of the Mentally Stronger with Therapist Amy Morin podcast. The details of her social media and her podcast you can see in the description box of this particular video in case you want to connect with her and in case you want to talk to her. She is also an internationally best-selling author. Her books, including 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, has been translated into more than, or approximately, if I'm not wrong, 40 languages, and more than 1 million copies have been sold. The Guardian, one of the leading pioneers in journalism, has dubbed her as the self help guru of the moment, and Forbes called her a thought leadership star. And people say that her book is one of the top 20 must read books of all time, not of the current era, but of all time. She's that good. So let's not waste any time and bring her on the screen. Amy, first of all, thank you so much and welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So I'm a little, I have mixed feelings right now because I talk about this subject very personally because this is something that I have been facing for the last 7, 8 years, and whatever ways I have tried to handle it, I have done that. But before we go into the tough questions, or let's say before we go into the technical questions, if did I miss something in the introduction, or do you want to share a little bit more about who you are, especially to the audience in India from India who do not know or maybe do not know much about you?
Well, it was a great introduction, so thank you for all of that. I guess the unofficial version is I am a therapist, but what I learned the most about mental strength wasn't necessarily what I learned in college. It was through my own journey. When I was 23, my mom passed away suddenly and unexpectedly. And then when I was 26, my husband died very unexpectedly as well and suddenly. And it was really my own grief and my own pain that taught me the most about how to grow mentally stronger and what mental strength looks like when you're going through tough times in life. And I didn't plan to become an author. I never imagined that I would be here, but my father-in-law was diagnosed with terminal cancer sort of after my mother had passed away, my husband had passed away, and it took years to kind of start to rebuild my life, but I did. And I had gotten remarried and I got a new job and a new house. And it was then that I got the news that my father-in-law's cancer was terminal. And I was like, oh, this can't be it. How could I keep losing my loved ones? This isn't fair. And it was in that moment that I wrote myself a letter of what mentally strong people don't do, and I found it helpful, so I thought maybe this letter could help somebody else, and I put it on the internet, and 50 million people read that letter, and it
Wow.
led to my first book, and now I have 6 books, and it's been 10 years, since I started talking about mental strength. But it again, although I had the knowledge from college about what it took to be mentally strong, it was really my journey about how do you get through painful times that probably taught me the most. But I also learned from the people coming into my therapy office too, that people would come in and tell me about their struggles and how they were getting through tough times. And the lessons that they taught me were really instrumental too in figuring out how do I get through the tough times in my own life.
I don't know what to say to that, frankly speaking. But to the audience, I just want to let you guys know something that we haven't prepared any questions per se. Amy doesn't know what I'm going to ask her and what she needs to speak about, because mental health is something which is a very natural thing, I would say. And Amy, correct me if I'm wrong in observing that. And it's something that needs to talk about. People have been talking about it, but people have perception about how it's diagnosed, how it's treated, and the methods around it. uh, Amy, with you have a beautiful story. And when I say beautiful story, let me also add here that someone in the chat room already commented in the morning when I announced the event that you are also a beautiful woman. So I
Ah,
think both the things go hand in hand. But if we have to start off in from the very basics of it, is there a difference between life coaching, therapy versus mental coaching? If yes, then how would you define that?
there is a difference. So when it comes to life coaching, or when somebody calls themselves a coach, they may not necessarily have a degree or a license to practice. Anybody can become a life coach today if they want to start a website and start charging people money to talk to you. The difference between a therapist is that somebody that has education, a background in it, and they have a degree and they have a license that's monitored. Often for life coaching, it can be helpful for people who are struggling with a certain thing. Somebody might say, I really want to know how to speak up to my boss at work and I want to get better at that. Maybe a life coach who's been there and struggled with it can be really helpful. But if you're dealing with a mental illness, you have depression, you have anxiety, ADHD, some sort of mental health issue, you want to see somebody who knows how those issues are treated. And it would sort of be like you can learn nutrition facts and ideas on how to manage your health on Instagram. You can learn them from anybody. You might find somebody who says, this is what I do to for my diet and how I manage the exercise in my life. And you might find that to be really helpful. However, if you develop a physical health issue, you may wanna go to see somebody, a doctor who can say, "This is how to treat it, and this is what will help," rather than just taking advice from somebody, online. Often, life coaches deal with the here and now, like what's going on with you right today, whereas a mental health therapist might deal with, something that happened 6 years ago or childhood trauma, or they might help you, connect some of the dots with your mental health so you can figure out, "Oh, some of these things I do now are because this happened 10 years ago or because of the way I was raised. How do I heal from those old emotional wounds?"
Old wounds is something that contribute a lot, and I think it's something which is very common to people across the globe now. But now that we've put aside the basic definitions of it, people, as I said earlier, people have a lot of how and what mental health means. Would it be fair to say that it is same as happiness, or is it simply the absence of mental illness?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I would say, like, mental health is a continuum, just like physical health could be. We don't ask people, "Are you physically healthy?" and expect them to say yes or no all the time. Like, somebody might say, "I have high cholesterol," but that doesn't mean that they're physically ill. They might live a really healthy lifestyle, and they might look really healthy. And not all health conditions are created equal. Mental health is the same. Where we land on this continuum of mental health can change at any given moment. How much sleep you got last night, what you ate for breakfast today, what how much stress you have in your life, what's going on at work, all of those things affect you. And we can all take steps to manage our mental health the best we can, taking care of your body, taking care of your family, making sure that you are doing fun things in life, that you're managing your stress the best as you can. These are all steps that we can take to try to be as mentally healthy as possible. But you can't always prevent an illness. You might still have depression, but you can still work on your mental health. Or you might temporarily be really struggling with your mental health because something awful happened. A family member or loved one gets sick. Your mental health is probably going to decline for a little bit while you figure out how to help them or how to address the situation. So I think it's important to remember that we have control over some of the factors that affect our mental health, but not all. And just because you don't have a mental illness like depression or anxiety doesn't necessarily mean that you're mentally healthy. Just like physical health. Somebody might say, I sit on the couch all day, every day, and I feel okay. So does that make me physically healthy? Compared to who? Somebody else that exercises and eats a really healthy diet might say, no, you're not healthy. So, I think it's important to say, how do I be the healthiest I can in my life, and what does that look like for me? And sometimes better mental health is about happiness, but not always. Sometimes people say, I'm mentally healthier, but at the same time, I'm making a bigger contribution to society. Maybe that's a little bit more stressful, but I feel good about what I'm doing. So maybe I don't feel like I'm happy all the time, but I'm still mentally healthy.
Amy, it's a weird thing. While you were speaking, there was a small little video that was playing in my mind, and I'll share something with you, complete in a different direction. When I first started talking about it, about mental health and depressions and people suffering with anxiety attacks and all, I tried to. tell myself or try to figure out, what exactly it looks like. What does depression look like? Because around us, not everyone is crying all the time and, coming to you and telling you, okay, I've got some problem in my life. They're happy, they're going out with you, partying and all those things. But someone shared a video. A friend of mine, her brother passed away at a very young age. And she shared a video of about 15 seconds wherein this guy was laughing with his friends, enjoying with his family on vacation, very short clip. And at the end, the message read, "This is what depression looks like." Now that caught my eye. That this is what depression looks like. Would you say it's a fair assessment, or would you say there are different determinants of what mental health looks like? Because people might say that feeling wise or emotion wise, what it is, but what does it look like? No one knows.
That is a huge misconception that people think people who have depression stay in bed and they, just cry for days on end. As a therapist, that's not what I see. When people are depressed, they often have really good jobs. On the outside, they look happy. In fact, sometimes we know comedians, people who are really funny, struggle with depression, and they'll say, "Well, I'm trying to make other people laugh because I feel so bad on the inside." And other people are like, "I would have never expected that." A lot of people are more irritable than they are sad when they're depressed. So sometimes those grumpy people that you meet might be battling depression and they just come across as grouchy, but really it's sadness and depression deep down underneath all of that. At other times, people do get funnier or they act in ways that seem a little bit out of character. And again, they're trying to cheer other people up or they're trying to put on a mask to cover up their depression. A lot of people who have depression are really good at hiding it. And a lot of people go to work all day, every day. Their coworkers, sometimes their closest friends and family have no idea that they are battling it. So you can't tell if somebody's depressed just by looking at them.
And because you use this word emotions and attachment, even I use those. But what kind of a role, if I may say, what kind of a role does attachment plays in one's mental health or well-being? Because a lot of people say, even me at even me at times, I'm guilty of that too, that I'm very detached. I consider myself to be a very detached person. I don't get emotionally attached to a lot of people except then dogs. I love dogs, so that is the only attachment I have in life. But even when I say that, and I have accepted that in front of the people I talk to on my particular platform, uh, I do struggle with differentiating the attachment and the detachment word because things do affect me. And if at all people who say that they are detached, would you say they are in need of some help and something which they are not even aware of? How does how does one find help? Because when I diagnosed myself that okay, there is something wrong in my life, I started and started listening to people. I started reading a lot of stuff. I started watching a lot of stuff. People like you, I started following them. And okay, this is what they're saying. This is what is happening. So my attachment and my detachments are basically two things intertwined. I'm just not able to differentiate between them. Would you say attachment has kind of a bigger role to play in it?
So I guess it depends what exactly you mean when you say that you're detached. Do you mean that you're detached from people in your life or are you detached from your emotions? Because people use that phrase differently.
I would say people, not
People.
emotions,
Okay.
but I would say people.
So what we know from the research is that our relationships are the number one factor that determine our psychological well-being and happiness in life. And you don't it's not really about the quantity of people, but it's about the quality. People that have 3 close relationships, somebody they can confide in, tend to do much better in life than people who say, "I don't have any close relationships at all." And that it affects everything from, how well we take care of ourselves to how long we live. And so for people who struggle to have healthy relationships, sometimes it's about looking at, like, what are the fears? What are the things I'm afraid of? Am I afraid people will abandon me and they'll leave? Do I not know how to ask for help? Do I, worry that people will hurt me? So for people that really say, "Yeah, and I wanna work on that, I wanna develop healthier relationships," it might be about talking to a therapist if you can. Could be an online therapist or an in-person therapist to explore, like, "Why is this so difficult for me? And what do I do about it? What are those small steps I could take? And what am I afraid of would happen if I take those small steps? If I let somebody in my life just a little bit, like what are the fears that come up? And then how might I sabotage that? It might be that you let somebody in for a minute and then you do something that runs away so that you don't have to be close to that person. There's all kinds of different kinds of issues that can crop up. So I would say if somebody is struggling with that, definitely talk to somebody if you can.
Personally, how do you prepare people to share their stories? Because I'm pretty sure a lot of people contact you or for one-on-one sessions and how to handle things in their life. How do you make them feel comfortable in terms of, okay, tell me what's going on in your mind?
So we often start slow because that's true. And we know the number one factor about whether people get better in therapy is how much they trust their therapist. So
Hmm.
it doesn't really matter what kind of techniques the therapist is using. A lot of other things don't really matter. That's what matters is how much people trust their therapist and they feel comfortable talking. So we often start really slow with like, let's talk about your day to day life. Maybe we ask a bit about what their overall childhood was like. And then sometimes when somebody says, gosh, I have a story, but I'm afraid to tell it, we don't talk about the story right away. We talk about those fears. Like, what are you afraid would happen if you shared that story? And sometimes people share their stories just a little bit at a time too. And that's fine. We'll take as long as somebody needs to be able to talk about it.
I have an observation, something that I want to take on because obviously you are the expert over here. Again, it's a personal observation. Correct me if I'm wrong, because if again, I'm not an expert. But do you visually have to be very strong, visually in the sense that stitching the theories together? Because I heard one of your podcasts wherein it talked about how people not telling you the complete true story. They tell you the story, but not the complete true story. They might add something which maybe they are embarrassed about something,
Hmm.
maybe they are embarrassed about some incident in their life or the people they are talking about. It could be anything. Do you have to be visually strong in terms of trying to imagine yourself that okay, this person is telling me this story, but maybe it didn't happen this way? Or would you say that's presumption and that is something that a coach or a expert like you should not be doing? How do you figure out the missing points in a story when someone starts talking to you?
Ooh, another great question. So we know statistically 97% of people said, yeah, I lied to my therapist. And I completely understand. We don't want to go in and say, hey, I messed up this week. I made this mistake, or this is what really happened. It's tough. We don't even want to admit those things to ourselves. So for people to say that out loud, that's really tough to do. Sometimes it's embarrassing. Sometimes we have shame. Sometimes we just don't want to get sidetracked. Like, yeah, I did this week, but this is what I want to talk about. And you have a different agenda. And as a therapist, my job is to believe people when they come in. And of course, there's always multiple sides to a story, and it doesn't necessarily mean somebody is lying. If I asked you, is it hot outside today? Your answer might be different than the person next to you, just because your definition of what hot is a little bit different, right? I live in South Florida where the weather's usually pretty hot. Lately, it's not as hot. So I think, oh, it's kind of cold out. Compared to most of the world right now, it is not cold here. But to know that, or if you and I, even if you and I went to the same restaurant and somebody said, was the restaurant busy today? You might say yes, and I say no, because we're just have different ideas, or we notice different things, or I'm used to restaurants that are super busy and you're not. It really is based on our life experience and our perceptions. And now, when people are struggling with something like depression, they'll only tell you the bad parts of a story usually because their brain literally overlooks the good stuff. Or when somebody has anxiety, their brain is on high alert for the danger all the time. So they might say, I almost died 4 times on my way to my appointment today. They're not lying. They just feel like they almost got in a car accident 4 times because they struggle with anxiety. So we always take that into consideration and knowing. And so one of the questions we often ask people is if I asked you that person who was with you today to share their story, what would they likely say? Well, they'd say it was fine, or they'd say it wasn't that busy, or they'd say I was patient, whatever it was. But sometimes just helping people see that there are different versions of the very same story, and it's not necessarily that you're lying. It's just somebody else has a different perspective.
You talked about versions. I think people also have different versions of themselves in one singular life. People are
Yeah.
we are kids to start off with, then we go into teenage, then we become some sort of a bread and butter provider, be it a male or a female. Then we become an elderly, and eventually we leave the world. We will talk about those phases also, wherein we will talk about kids, we will talk about elderlies and how to help them. But people like you and me, I'll try to make a personal connection over here. People like you and me, if at all we were not talking about this particular thing, just two people trying to do something in their career, would it be a fair assessment to say that not knowing the kind of things that you want to do, or not setting up a goal, or setting up a concrete role play in your particular life about any specific thing. It can be a career based thing, it can be a relationship based thing, it can be your responsibilities towards society or towards your family. Does knowing and not knowing play a role in terms of how mentally strong you can be or how mentally vulnerable you can be?
Um, can you explain that just a little bit more so I understand your question?
So, if at all I don't have any goal in my life, I'm
Uh-huh.
just sitting idle and, just looking at people that, okay, this person, okay, Amy has written a book. Everyone knows her, 1 million copies, 40 different languages. Okay, I also want to write a book, but I don't have a specific path to do it. Or I'm just
Okay.
thinking that I'm going to do, but I'm not charting out a plan or doing a mind mapping of how to go about it. Would it in the long run result in me being mentally weak because I do not know how to do things in life, and that may also lead to depression or anxiety in my life?
Yeah, I think it can for a lot of people who say, "Oh, I'd like to do that someday." But, look, someday's never gonna land on the calendar, so unless you say, "I'm gonna work on this," and how do you write a book? You start out with maybe just 1 page a day, or you write 100 words at a time. And when people break those things down, I think it helps us build our confidence. Because if somebody said, "Gee, I want you to build a house," and you thought, "Well, I don't know how to do that," and you never started learning, you'll never get there. But if you say, "What could I do today to get a little closer to that goal?" And then we do that thing, it gives us confidence and it helps us to move toward knowing, like, actually, I can do a lot more than my brain thinks that I can. I'm more capable. I'm competent. I'm capable of learning new things. I can accomplish things when I want to. And I think that really gives us confidence. I think it's easy to get caught up into just letting life pass by and thinking, I wish I could do that stuff too, or it'd be nice if I could learn those things, but I don't have time, or I'm not able to, or it will take too long." And our brains easily talk us out of doing those things when really we could potentially have the ability to do those things too if we just started working on them now.
Yeah, people have this thing that, and or at least I say to people that we have the answers. We all have the answers. We just want someone else to tell it to us because we think that they can guide us better. Now, you talked about if we have to do something, you have to go for it, and you have to stick to a plan. Baby steps, tiny little steps, writing maybe 1 page a day or 100 words a day, like you said. Now, hypothetically, if one makes a plan and one tries to stick to it, but unfortunately they can't, or they are not able to because, okay, I have a job. Okay, today I have to socially be active somewhere. I have to go out of the home. Okay, this is not working out. This is not the pace I was expecting it to, expecting it to be working at. 10,000 different reasons, 10,000 different excuses, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people do come to you asking about how I have set a goal. How do I stick to it? So if you have to give them, let's say, a couple of points or a 3 pointer in terms of how to stick to a goal, uh, how would you go about it?
So one thing would be to make sure that you have a better plan. I'll just keep using the example of if you decided you wanted to write a book, you're probably going to have to give something up. Maybe you spend an hour a day working on the page that you're going to write. Where's that hour going to come from? Are you going to spend 1 hour less meeting with family? You're going to spend an hour less sleeping, an hour less watching TV. There's going to be an hour that you need to find. So plan ahead for that. Like, what am I willing to give up to work on my goal? When people have a better plan, it gets a little bit easier. And then I would say another strategy is to remember that you don't have to be perfect. So if your goal is to write 100 pages or to write 1 page in a book every single day, and you said, I only did it twice this week. Well, that's 2 days that you did it. That's great. Maybe next week you can do 3 days. And you just work. You don't say, I'm going to give up writing a book because I only did it twice last week. You can keep building on what you have and celebrate that. Like at the end of the week, I at least did it for 2 days. Two is better than zero. And that can help you keep going. And a third strategy would be to hold yourself accountable. And because it gets so easy to like, I'm not going to do that today. And then tomorrow rolls around and you think, oh, I'm not going to do it today either. But we know from the research, if you just put an X on the calendar on the days that you do something, you're much more likely to stick with it. So they had people who wanted to exercise, and they took a group of people and said, just put an X on the calendar the day that you exercise. And then they started counting up how many days those people exercised. And it's way more than the people who didn't put an X on the calendar. something about our brains just likes to see, oh, I did this 2 days a week. I can probably do it a third. So you're much more likely to stick to a goal when you find a way to hold yourself accountable. It could be a paper calendar, you have something on your phone, an app, whatever it might be, but just something really simple that says, here's a visual that I'm going to have that will remind me that I am working on this goal. Here's the progress I've made. And yeah, I want to keep doing it again today too. Just like maybe you had a star chart when you were a little kid. When you're older, we still like to see that progress. So I would find something to keep you accountable as well.
And being specific also helps because, again, referring to one of your podcasts that I heard recently about losing weight. And if someone says, okay, I want to lose between 1 pound to 3 pounds in a week, they might get stuck in between. They might not reach anywhere. But if you say, okay, this week I'm going to lose 2 pounds, being specific also helps.
Being specific helps, but it actually a range is even more helpful. So if you let's go back to the book analogy. If you said I'm going to
Mm.
write one page every single day, then you might write one page every day, but you're going to feel bad when you don't reach that goal. But if you said I'm going to write a half a page to 2 pages every day, research shows that once you get to a half a page, you're like, "Oh, I did it. I reached my goal today. I actually feel like I'm going to keep going now." And you'll probably write more than one page. So if your goal was just to write one page, you might do it. But if you say, I'm going to do a half a page to 2 pages, chances are you'll actually write more. And that was the example with weight loss. When people said, I'm going to lose 2 pounds a week, sometimes they fell short. But when they said, I want to lose 1 to 3 pounds a week, they actually lost like 2.5 pounds a week.
And sometimes when you don't even try, it happens. And sometimes even if you try, it doesn't happen. It has happened with me. I set a target to myself that, okay, in the next 6 months, I'm going to reduce 8 kgs. Never happened, not even half a kg. And suddenly when I completely gave it up, okay, not happening, it's okay. Don't care about it. And suddenly I lost 5 kgs. So maybe something that I worked on result gave me a result later on. And people who are mentally vulnerable, for the lack of a better word, people who are mentally vulnerable, although they do need help, but they get this feeling that people are trying to change them or people are trying to fix them like a broken toy or something like that. Does it bother them more in the longer run, or how would one approach a person who is struggling mentally without making them feel that something is extremely wrong with them, and for the lack of a better word again, feel like they are bereaved, that they've lost someone in their life and everything is just dead to the end? So how does this being judged by the people, that kind of emotion plays a role in approaching for us asking for help? Because a lot of people don't get help because they just don't ask for it.
You're right. And a lot of people are afraid to ask for it, or they're afraid that they'll be judged because people are going to think I'm broken or I'm crazy or that there's something really wrong with me. So it's really important if somebody in your life is struggling to not give them advice. And so many people will come into my therapy office and say, I have been struggling with depression for years. And people would say things like, well, you just need to exercise more. You should drink some water, or you should eat a better diet. And when people hear that advice, it's almost like they feel like people don't understand, which is true. A lot of people giving them advice didn't understand, but it also feels like people are minimizing it, or they just are they aren't there to listen to you. So I think one of the best things we can do is just check in with somebody and say, "How are you doing right now?" And then say, "What could I do to be helpful?" And ask them rather than offering advice, telling people like you should get help or you can't keep doing this. Actually, it usually has the opposite effect. People are rebellious, and when you tell them you should do this, they're in their heads, they're thinking, and here's all the reasons why I'm not going to. Or when we say you should stop this bad habit, people actually think about, well, actually, here's all the reasons why I like this bad habit. And that makes them more likely to keep doing that bad habit. So I always tell people, don't offer advice unless somebody asks you for it. If somebody says to you, I'm really struggling and I can't figure this out. What do you think I should do? Then they're inviting you to give them some input. But if they aren't asking for your advice, I would be very cautious about suggesting what you think they should do, because it probably is going to backfire and it might make things worse.
Would it be fair to say that this probably also results in people when they look around each other and they might have an idea that, okay, someone is going through a difficult time, maybe job wise or relationship wise or something like that, but he or she till now has not come to me to talk about it or ask for help. and they are all okay with it. That okay, I am there for you. I'm not going to initiate the conversation, but I'm there for you, and they are accommodating to the whole situation, unless and until to the point wherein that particular person who is struggling becomes irrational at times or becomes angry or temperamental. That is when people start to think that okay, I need to stay away from you. So how to balance out these two acts of being involved with someone, be it as a friend, be it as a mother, as a father, whatever capacity we are in.
And there is that, responsibility. If somebody hasn't gotten out of bed for 3 weeks, you don't wanna just step over them and act like it's normal. You might need to speak up. And what I would say is important to do is stick to the facts. I've noticed lately that you haven't been eating very much. I've noticed lately that you
Mm.
seem to be sleeping a lot. I've noticed lately that you seem to have a lot, more of a temper than you used to. You seems like you seem to be a little bit more irritable. I'm wondering, is anything going on or if there's anything I could do to help? And you just open the door a little bit rather than saying, "You need to get a hold of yourself. You need to fix this. You need to do something about it." Instead, invite people to talk. People will believe the words coming out of their own mouth much more than they'll believe the words coming out of your mouth. So if somebody says, "Actually, yeah, I'm going through a tough time. Here's what's going on, and I do need to get things together. I do need to manage this better." Then they're much more likely to take action than if we tell them what they need to do. So I think just invite you can certainly point out that you see some behaviors that you're concerned about. Be really specific, like, "This is what I see happening. I'm just wondering if you're okay." And that you're showing concern for them. You aren't lecturing them or telling them what to do. Instead, you're asking, "What could I do to be helpful?" Or, um and I always think it's a good idea to have some resources available. If you want somebody to talk to a doctor, see a therapist, or something like that, it's a good idea to say, "Here's the phone number of somebody I think you could call," or "Here's a website that you might enjoy looking at," or a podcast you could listen to, um, just as an offer, and then leave it alone. You might just have it written down on a piece of paper of, "Here's some things I thought might be helpful for you," and then leave the piece of paper. You tape it to the refrigerator, and then it's up to people to decide if that's something that they wanna do or not without saying, "Did you call the doctor yet? And I told you to call the doctor yesterday." When we start acting like that, again, it repels people and makes them less likely to get help. But if we just say, "Here's the information I have. I'll have it when you're ready," when they're ready, they might ask you.
You talked about someone not getting out from the bed for 3 weeks or 2 weeks and things like that, but that is a part of a defense mechanism, isn't it, for the people who are maybe going through a difficult phase in their particular, like, whatever it could be, career wise or relationship. I'm counting all the things together, but I've observed this, and I'll admit it on the video, and people who follow me a little bit on YouTube, they know that what I have been going through for the last 6 7 years. I sleep whenever I feel emotionally drained out. I sleep a lot. Like for 2 3 days, I'll just completely shut off everything. I'll go to the bed, don't get up, and but after 2 days, I'll say, okay, enough. I've had my break. I've had my in Hindi we say there's this particular palace, and of a self-made palace that people have. Cope Bhavan. Cope Bhavan is the sorrow house, basically, that you have entered into your sorrow house and you don't want to come out of it. So sleeping plays a very important role. It can reignite the passion also, but it can be a very disturbing defense mechanism, would you say?
It can, and so sometimes if you have a problem, like if you're worried about something and you go to sleep, the next day you have a different perspective. That thing you were worried about isn't a big deal. That you like took a break from worrying about it, your brain while you were sleeping kind of solved the problem or said relax a little bit and you feel better when you wake up. But when people are battling something like depression, their brain will often tell them you can't handle the world today, that you can't go to work, that you're too tired, you can't be around people. And then sometimes people stay in bed and their depression actually gets worse. And so if it's very time limited and somebody says, I'm going to stay in bed for 2 days to just kind of hide from the world while I'm working this out. And at the end of 2 days, they can get up and go back and do all the things that they need to do. That works. It's pretty rare that that works for people. Most people say after I stayed in bed for 2 days, I actually feel worse. I have less energy and I don't feel like going out and doing anything. So I actually want to stay in bed even more. So I think it's important to look at that and say, how's it affecting me? And Is it just my brain lying to me? I'll have some people that say, "I can't miss any more work because 'cause I'm gonna get in trouble," but when I wake up in the morning, I feel so depressed I can't get out of bed, and my brain tells me, "Just stay in bed today, you'll feel better." But I won't, my brain's lying to me.
When I sleep as a defense mechanism, the only thing that gets me out of it is I look at my belly and I'm like, okay, this guy is getting fatter, and before it gains any more weight, I need to take care of it and come out of it and maybe do something, maybe just go for a walk. But people have this thing. People have challenges in their life. People have a lot to do with digital media also, and the kind of the world that we are in right now. It puts a lot of pressure on people across domain, be it professionally or personally. Do you think the decline in the value of relationships that we have in and around us, it contributes more to the mental illness of the people and the lack of belief in people? Because so many heartbreaks, so many betrayals, so many difficult things to go through from the very early age on in the life. Do you think that kind of plays a role in terms of how people have stopped believing in each other? And because we don't believe in each other anymore, we are mentally more vulnerable and much more weaker than what people were maybe 100 years back or 200 years back.
Definitely. There's so much research on the importance of community and feeling like you have a sense of belonging and that you can trust other people, that you can go to people when you need help, that they'll be there for you when you need them. And we know after a disaster, a natural disaster happens or some sort of crisis happens in a city, if there's people who have social support, then they're much less likely to develop post traumatic stress disorder as compared to people that say, I didn't have anybody I could talk to about this. So often just knowing there are people I could talk to, somebody out there who understands, or I can tell my friends and family, and maybe they didn't go through that thing, but they're willing to listen to me and not make me feel like I'm going crazy because I'm struggling with this certain thing. That's all huge to our mental health. And I do worry about people being lonelier than ever, and a lot of people saying, I don't have people I can talk to. And I think that's taking a serious toll on a lot of people.
And it's very surprising, especially in this age, wherein there are so many people think that they are connected to. Oh, I've got 10 million followers on Instagram. I've
Yeah.
got 500,000 people on YouTube. My Facebook page has got 200,000 people connected to me. But this race in the digital world, the race of the never ending race, if I may say, of likes, comments, this fame, or the idea of trying to perceive it, it also leads on to the pressure. I'll give you a little example. I want to add a line over here. We lost a woman today in India. She was an actress. Her methods of getting fame was a little questionable, but never the same. The era of digital media, wherein the things that you want to do, the things that you think you're supposed to do to get the fame, the likes, the comments, that also has crippled people's mental health, or I would say courage also to how do they want to survive in life.
Yeah, I think for so many people, there's that pressure or that false sense of if I have 1,000 people who like my stuff, then I must have friends or I have people that I'm connected to. But we know from most of the research that social media causes us to feel less connected and we feel lonelier. So instead of talking to people face to face, we're connecting with strangers online. Or maybe we're even talking to our friends, but we're not doing it face to face anymore. And that human interaction is so key to our overall mental health, and unfortunately, a lot of people are getting caught up into comparing themselves to other people online and thinking, "I'm not as good as somebody else because they have more followers or more likes than I do," and we see it taking a toll on them.
And would it also be fair to say that the courage of sharing also goes for a toss, because you get this feeling that, okay, I am a known person, I'm a celebrity. If I say to people, and it happens, we have cases in India also, wherein if a celebrity says that I have a depression, or I have faced something difficult in my life, people try to mock them that,
Yes.
what kind of problems are you talking about? You have so much of money, there are so many people who know you, you're traveling around the world, you are in all the movies, all the brand endorsements and all those things. So that being judged by the people for the very reason that whoever you are, that also plays a very important role. People don't want to share it openly, but just talk behind the curtains or talk behind four walls?
Yeah, so there's this idea that if you have enough money, if you are famous, if you get to do fun stuff, then you won't develop a mental illness. But we don't say the same about if a celebrity gets a physical health issue. Oh, that's too bad. We don't judge them for it. We understand it can happen to anybody. Depression, anxiety, mental illnesses can happen to absolutely anybody. And it's not that they're not grateful for what they have. In fact, sometimes people that have a lot of stuff and then they still battle something, they feel guilty, like, "I should be happy and I'm not," and then they feel worse. So, I think it just serves as proof that, money doesn't prevent mental illness or fame or, uh, doing fun stuff doesn't always prevent somebody from developing a mental health issue, and it's unfortunate that then they sometimes do get mocked because it's sending a really unhealthy message to other people who say, "I wanted to talk about what I'm struggling with too, but I don't wanna get made fun of."
There was a guest on this particular platform about a month and a half back, maybe. Very famous YouTuber from India, but YouTube unfortunately decided that he doesn't deserve to be on YouTube, so they threw his channel out. They banned his channel, and we were just talking about things. And there was a question that I asked him, uh, and he took a good pause of 10 seconds before responding to my question. The question was, "What do you want?"
Mm.
And he thought about it and then he answered. There's a question in the chat room which caught my eye. And before I go into what I want to ask you, I want to take that question from the chat room because I think it's a very interesting thing. How often do life coach or therapists get into depression? I think it's very common for them to get into depression due to the people they interact with. I think it's a very valid question.
Eh, Life coaches and therapists are human beings, so I would say the rate of depression, is probably about the same as it is with other people. They have to take care of themselves. If you sit in a room with people all day and hear a lot of sad stories, you certainly have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself outside of work so that you, are less susceptible than you might be than if you didn't take care of yourself. And you'll see a lot of, therapists who struggle with what we call vicarious trauma. Hearing horror stories all day long of people that have been through awful things tends to make us jumpy. Like, if there's a loud noise in the other room, a therapist will often jump about 2 feet and, take on a lot of symptoms of PTSD, just from hearing those stories. So I think PTSD is probably a bigger issue for a therapist than depression is actually.
So what kind of therapists does a therapist go to when he or she is in problem?
So most therapists have their own therapy and they talk to another therapist and therapists often have support groups as well so they can work through issues and strange things and things. We have to keep information confidential so you can't come home and tell your family about your day, but you need some people that you can talk to process sometimes. Listen to this and I'm really struggling with how to cope with my own emotions when I hear these kinds of stories. And sometimes people don't know your therapist may have been through something very similar, so hearing your story might stir up some stuff from them, so they have to make sure that they're taking care of that too.
I think in connection to that, would it be fair to say that while people like you, the experts who talk to people like me, maybe, or someone else who comes to you and decides to talk and share their stories, it's also it's understanding yourself or oneself is equally important as being understood by others because people will have their own versions of how they understand you or how they perceive you. But till the time you don't realize who you are or the way you want to represent your story to your friends, to your loved ones, to even your therapist, maybe in chunks, maybe the different versions of the stories, but nevertheless, your story in terms of how you understand, okay, I'm talking to Amy today, my therapist. This is what I want her to know for sure. Okay, this is my friend. This is what I want them to know for sure. Okay, these are my colleagues in the office. This is what I want them to know. Understanding yourself, do you think that also plays a very important role? If at all I have to come and sit with you and say, okay, now I've told you my story, how do I go about solving issues with this and with this?
Yeah, self-awareness is huge, and sometimes people, will say, "I feel bad because 'cause I'm kind of a different person with my friends than I am with my family or with my coworkers," and that's not a bad thing. You might talk to your probably hopefully you talk to your, grandmother a little differently than maybe you do your friends from childhood. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're being fake. It just means you show a different side of yourself to different people. And then when people better understand themselves, a lot of people in therapy will say, I don't know why I did this. Why did I say that mean thing? Or why did I lie about something? And that's a wonderful thing to talk to a therapist about, is to get to better understand yourself, why you do the things that you do, and maybe how some of your assessments of yourself are a little different than the way other people will see you, or the labels we put on ourselves. Sometimes somebody might say, I'm a really honest person. But then they'll share a story of, "Well, I lied to my friend last week. I said I had a headache, but really I just didn't wanna see them." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, you tell me you're a really honest person, and then this is the behavior you described. How does that work out in your mind? Do you see that as dishonesty, or do you still see yourself as an honest person?" And part of our role is to just give people objective feedback on the labels that they use to describe themselves, we display that sometimes doesn't line up.
And is there any time frame that one attaches to depression or anxiety in terms of how long it is going to last? Will it be a lifelong thing? Will it be a 6 month thing or a 6 year thing? Also, what happens when someone relapses into depression or someone says, okay, I am perfectly happy now. My anxieties are gone. My depression is gone. I'm very happy. I've got a beautiful girlfriend. I've got a big house. I've got a big car, beautiful job, all the good stuff that one can ask for. But after a while, the person relapses and comes back to you that, okay, Amy, something is wrong again. Now what do I do?
So there are different kinds of depression, different types of depression. Sometimes people have a low grade depression that lasts perhaps an entire life. Other times people have periods of depression that come and go. Sometimes people have something like bipolar disorder. And same with anxiety. Sometimes people have general anxiety that lasts forever. Sometimes people have a specific phobia. Sometimes people have obsessive compulsive disorder. So it really depends on the type of mental illness we're talking about, whether it's curable or treatable, and then how to manage it. So then one of the things we often do before we end therapy with somebody is talk about, how would you know if your depression were coming back? What would be the signs or the symptoms? And somebody might say, when my appetite decreases for a couple days, that might be a sign that I'm starting to get depressed again. Or when I start sleeping a lot, then I would know I was starting to get depressed. So then we come up with a plan. What could you do when you start to notice those little signs that maybe in the past you didn't notice were signs that you were getting worse? But now when you notice them, what can you do? And somebody might say, I'll start talking to my friends, or I'll push myself to exercise a little bit, or I'll call back to come to another therapy appointment. But when people have a plan for that, when they can recognize the signs and symptoms, but when they have a plan, they tend to feel a lot better too.
You used a word in between, and maybe in the future, whenever you will have time next, we would love to host you and we'll talk about that in detail. But it caught my attention, and I want to just a brief thing, if you can just enlighten us with this thing, the bipolar disorder thing. What does it look like? Because I think I am a bipolar, but then again, I just wanted to know a little bit about it.
So the biggest misconception about bipolar is that you change your personality every 5 minutes. Like somebody might get really angry one minute and they're happy the next, and somebody will say, "Ah, they're bipolar." That's not really how
Mm.
bipolar works. Sometimes people stay in a depressive state for maybe 6 months at a time, and then they might end up being manic, which means for could be a week that they suddenly don't need to sleep and they feel like they're on top of the world and they feel great. But then they do some things that are really impulsive. They might spend a ton of money. They might quit their job because they're going to become a famous YouTuber all of a sudden. And they have all these grand ideas. And then they might dip back down into a depression again. But bipolar looks different in different people. Sometimes it's a lot more irritability than sadness, like we talked about before. Then when they're in a depressed state, they might just look more irritable. And sometimes people don't have a full-blown manic state, they have what we call hypomanic, and they just get kinda, like, happy, and it's almost like a relief from the depression, but yet it's not just regular, normal mood, it's elevated a little bit, and sometimes it will cause them some problems because they say, "I haven't slept in 3 days, but I've gotten so much done, I've cleaned my house, and I've been able to, feel really productive." It's best treated with medication, but also people often need therapy to figure out what are the signs and the symptoms that you are going through. How can you manage this? If you're going to maintain a job, what would that look like? When you get manic, you feel like you don't need to take your medication anymore. What could we do about that? And with treatment, it's often very treatable too. But a lot of times people go through almost their whole lives and they might mask it with substance abuse issues. Somebody might drink heavily, or somebody might just think, no, every 6 months I quit my job and break up with the person I'm in a relationship with, and I just like to try new things, but it might actually be bipolar under that.
Thankfully, nor do I have a lot of money, nor am I a famous YouTuber, so that part is taken care of. But do people get comfortable getting depressed or being in depression? Because there's a question about this also in the chat room that Renu has asked. Is some people become comfortable being depressed? What do you have to say about this? And I do believe that some people they just find their own versions of being quiet or aloof. Would do people get comfortable if they think they are suffering from depression?
Yeah, sometimes people just, I guess, come to a place of acceptance, and it's really about what does it cause for problems in your life? Somebody says this is it, but it doesn't cause me any problems, they might stay like that. But if it's causing problems, like I can't work, I can't earn money, I can't stay in a relationship, my family is getting upset with me because I don't want to do anything, and then it's creating problems in their life, that's when you know it's a problem. And their depression might say, don't get help because it's not going to work, or don't bother telling anybody what you're struggling with because they don't care. So sometimes it's just the depression lying to people, trying to convince them that they shouldn't get any better or that they shouldn't bother trying, and then they stay there. But other times people say, I'm just not like a happy-go-lucky person, and I'm going to stay kind of like this, and that's okay. And if that's how they want to stay, and it doesn't create any huge problems in their life, they might stay like that.
Yeah. We've already reached 51 minutes and time flies. We'll take a couple of questions from the chat room before we wrap it up. But I have one more question from my side that I would want your intake on, because this comes from a personal cage that I think I have inside my heart, and I relate to it a lot. I I've often realized or observed that sad songs or sad music or sad poetry plays a very major role in diluting whatever little strength you have inside you to fight against the difficulties in life that you may be facing. Again, keeping everything combined together here, professionally or personally. Is it a correct observation, or even sad music can lead to one getting more stronger, if not weaker?
So, again, that's an interesting question. It kind of depends. We tend to want to reinforce whatever mood we're in. So, if somebody's angry, they might want to listen to angry music. Somebody's sad, we tend to listen to sad music. There are times when that helps people work through their emotions. When you're sad and you listen to a song, you might feel like, I can't really put words to what's going on, but this person singing the song is helping me work through that. That might be helpful. But when somebody keeps listening to sad music over and over and over, it's unlikely that they're just suddenly gonna say, "And now I'm really happy." So sometimes we encourage people to do the opposite of what you feel. If your sadness is helpful in the moment, maybe it's helping you honor something you lost. Maybe you're really sad about something. You might say, "I'm gonna listen to sad music for a while and just stay here." But if you're so sad you can't go to work, you're so sad you can't function, or you've been sad for weeks on end, maybe you say, I'm going to force myself to listen to happy music to see if I can improve my mood just a little bit so that I can go out and do things and function better. So I think we can use things like music or poetry or sad things, sad movies as a tool. And then use the happy ones as a tool as well, to know that those things affect our emotions, and sometimes if our current feelings aren't serving us well, we can change what we're listening to, what we're surrounding ourselves with, and see if it might boost our mood just a little bit.
You know, we we talked about in the at the start of the video that we'll talk about two versions of human beings, that is kids and the elderlies. Now the same question has been asked by two people, one in the chat room by Avinash and one of the other viewer that we have. They have a similar question, so I'm going to put forward Avinash's question, which reads, how should we help children with depression and autism, and are these clinically different? Also, to add to it, Vitika had asked a very similar question. She also added that because kids cannot really say or express that they have depression or anxiety, how should a parent identify that, okay, there is something wrong going on with my kid, I need to address that?
So yeah, depression and autism are different. They affect kids. Their brains are wired a little differently, and the behaviors that you see are different, and they're treated differently. So it's important to get a correct diagnosis. Autism isn't curable, but certainly a lot of the symptoms of it can be managed when you have somebody who's informed about how to manage the symptoms. Depression in kids sometimes comes and goes. They may need treatment. Often with treatment, it gets better. And the person that said, yeah, like no 7-year-old is going to say, Mom, I'm kind of depressed today. Instead, what
Mm.
you're more likely to see is kids will complain about physical aches and pains. Kids with depression have a lot more stomach aches and headaches. They will just say
Okay.
they don't feel well. They will, uh, you'll see some changes probably in their appetite or their sleeping. Their grades might go down. Um, and they may not wanna do fun things anymore, they just kinda lay around more, they don't wanna do certain things, and they might be more irritable. So there are signs, but you're right, kids don't walk up to parents and say, "I'm struggling with anxiety or depression." The biggest one that we see is the complaints of, aches and pains, physical aches and pains.
But what would you say could be the reasons behind it? Because as people of an adult age, we have our careers to look after, we have parental responsibilities, or spouses, or social things that we need to take care of. What hampers or what bothers a child so much that he or she may get into depression, something that they can't even explain? But what could be the possible scenarios?
So it may not be anything in the environment, it may be more biological and genetic. Just like you might have
Okay.
a 7-year-old who develops a physical health issue, 7-year-old might develop a mental health issue, and it's not that you're a bad parent or that you're not giving them enough attention or enough time. It just might be that their personality and that they were born with a genetic predisposition to develop something like depression. So it certainly isn't something that the parents need to feel bad about or that they feel like they did anything wrong or that they need to do something differently. It might be that you have a kid who's more likely to get depressed than even a sibling. You might have 2 kids who are raised in the very same house, in the very same environment, and one of them struggles with depression and one of them doesn't. It may not have anything to do with the environment or your parenting. It might just be the way that one of them was born.
I recently read an article, and I also wrote about it, that having more siblings can actually affect your mental health. You can become a little more insecure and mentally weak. Do you find any logic behind it?
Having more what?
Having more siblings.
Oh, siblings. That's an interesting thing. I think some people say, "Gosh, if it weren't for my siblings, I wouldn't have people to talk to or people that understand me," because your siblings are really the people that will know you the longest in life, right? That you might have your sibling for 85 years. You're not gonna have your parents for 85 years of your life. So it's really your siblings and they understand your childhood. They may understand you better than anybody else. So for a lot of people, they'll say, "Yeah, if it weren't for my siblings, I would struggle." But for other people, they'll say, "I was bullied by an older sibling," or "I didn't get enough attention." So I think it all depends.
And how about the elderlies? Because even they can become irritable, or they become a little more aggressive, especially when they get to an age wherein they think, okay, my kids, they're all settled, married, their own kids, enjoying their life, but no one cares about me anymore. That feeling of no one cares about me anymore creeps in when you reach the age of 65, 70, 75. If God permits you to live on this earth, at this particular age. But how do you handle elderlies? Because they can be more stubborn than any kid that you may come across.
They can be, and you're right that sometimes when people get older, they feel like they have already done everything that they needed to do in life, and it's really that lack of meaning or the lack of purpose that they think, "Why bother?" Or, "I'm just what am I getting up for every day other than just waiting until the end of my life?" So it's really important for people to have purpose at any age, but that we make sure that elderly people do especially. And their purpose might just be that they are there to provide wisdom when it's somebody asks for their opinion, or that they help out with their grandchildren sometimes, or they still cook meals, or that they contribute somehow. And when people contribute, they tend to feel a lot better. So it's important for us to make sure that we're asking them for their opinion, and that we are making sure that they feel like they're valued and that they have something to contribute as well.
Hmm. We've already reached 1 hour, but if you allow me, I'll take one more question from the chat room. There are a lot of them,
I see
but
there are
we
a
do not
lot.
have that much. There are a lot, and I've saved approximately 15. But we cannot cover them all. But maybe, as I said, maybe in the future, whenever you have time, we'll have one more session and get these addressed. But one question I seriously want your take on, because ask her how to deal with regular sexual abuse in childhood, especially if it's done by parents.
Yeah, childhood sexual abuse when you were abused by a parent is something that is, so important to get help for. I would highly suggest that you, see a therapist if you can, to join a support group maybe with other people who can relate to what you've been through. If you have safe people in your life that you can talk to, a friend that you could confide in. But often people that say, "I was abused by the people that were supposed to love me the most, or the person that was supposed to care for me," I have trouble trusting people, and that makes complete sense. How would you know who you can trust in life if you couldn't trust your mother or your father? Uh, so just know that you aren't alone in that, and I think sometimes people say, "I started with an online group, maybe of anonymous people, and I just heard other people's stories a little bit, and it gave me the courage to share mine or to find somebody to reach out to or to get help." Um, and so often that helps people start to work through it as well.
So, Amy, as I said, there are tons of questions that people have thrown, but we do not have that much time. So maybe in the next session, whenever we do it, we will cover them. But if at all there is a message, if at all there is something that you want to share, something from your side to the people who are watching right now, people who will watch later on, what would you say to them? What would you tell them? Because I know it's a very open-ended question, but then again, that's normally how we wrap up. And in that open-ended question itself, a lot of things come out.
I would say that you're stronger than you think. Your brain will lie to you. It will tell you that you can't do something. It will tell you you're not good enough. And so many people struggle with those exact same thoughts. It's just that nobody talks about them. As a therapist, people tell me what they think. And I know that person after person says, I struggle with these things and nobody knows. So I would say, just know that those thoughts are normal, but it doesn't make them true, that your brain does lie. And you can always challenge those thoughts. When your brain says you can't do something, try to do it anyway. Or when your brain tells you you're not good enough, remind yourself of 3 reasons you are good enough. And when you practice those things by challenging your brain, you can teach your brain that you're not always going to listen to it. And that's really important, actually, to good mental health.
It is definitely important. What is also important to the people who are watching right now and later on, in the description box, there is every link, her social media, her website, her podcast. Please go ahead, connect with her. And in case you have any questions, which was not covered here today, if at all she will have time, maybe she can respond to you at a personal in a personal capacity also. But Amy, thank you so much. Again, lack of time, so much to talk about, and hopefully we'll stay connected and we'll do more sessions in the future together. But thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to host you and to learn a lot from you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I'd be happy to come back anytime. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Take care. Have a
Bye.
beautiful day.
You too.
All right. So, a podcast in English today, a different language. Not so different, but then again, generally we do Hindi podcasts, but because the guest is not from India, so this podcast was in English. My request to all of you would be check out the description box, all the details, her social media handles, her podcast, her website, details about her book, and everything is mentioned over there. Feel free to connect with her. I'll see whenever she is free in the near future. We'll try to arrange one more session and then one more and then one more because, as I told you, we will talk about mental health, irrespective of things. We will talk about it. I also want to take this opportunity to send my condolences to the family of Poonam Pandey. Uh, Although there are still a little doubts in terms of whether she has actually died or not, because no one seems to be able to trace her family. And her body was allegedly in Kanpur, if I'm not wrong, but it has not been traced there also. So people do not know if the news is entirely true or not. But then again, I'm pretty sure there is a lot of truth to it. People are not going to spread rumors like that. So condolences, but then again, just because, and I'm being very cruel over here, just because someone is dead does not necessarily uh, makes it a point that the bad things that someone does in life is forgiven. But then again, the family, the family is facing tough times. So yeah. So this is it. Share the video, subscribe to the channel if you're watching for the first time, click on the bell icon, get notified every time a new video comes in. I will see you tomorrow one more time with a very interesting subject about a very interesting person. If you can take a guess, be my guest. But then again, leave a comment, share the video, and make sure that it reaches to the people it's supposed to reach. And I hope most of the questions that you had in mind, directly or indirectly, were answered. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow. Jai Shri Ram.